Hello and welcome back to r/entitled parents. And if you're new here, I hope you enjoy.
Entitled aunt claims we have a poltergeist rather than admit that her kid destroyed my things. This happened a few years ago now, so though I do remember the sequence of events, conversations are a bit fuzzy. Also, kind of a long story, so the story does require some background. My aunt has 3 sons, who were 1, 5 and 8 at the time of this story. The younger 2 didn't play much of a part in this story. My aunt is and always was emotionally abusive and willingly sat by and watched as her husband was physically abusive to her and her children. Over the course of about 15 years, she was on and off with her husband and always said she was going to leave him but never did, and always went back in the end. Almost every single time she left, she always came crawling back to my mother and father seeking salvation, and they always begrudgingly welcomed her back. When this story takes place, Aunt had once again left her husband, promising that she was leaving for the final time, and so my family took her and her boys in. Things were off to a bad start immediately, and there were multiple events leading up to the poltergeist fiasco. The first event happened when I went into the restroom and saw that an expensive lipstick of mine was smeared over the mirror and sink, and the actual tube was destroyed. I am by no means a beauty guru or anything like that. However, I think I'm pretty decent at makeup and I have a small collection. I tend to buy pretty cheap products, but I have a few choice things that are relatively pricey, and all of which have been gifts. The lipstick in question was about $50 and had been a gift from a deceased friend, and it was honestly a bit sentimental. I completely understand that kids will be kids and stuff like this is bound to happen. So I think when stuff like this happens, what you should do is sit your kid down and tell them that stuff like this isn't okay, right? Well, no, apparently not. Prior to this, Aunt had always had the "my child can do no wrong" mentality. So I was already expecting her to avoid blame or not to do anything. But I thought I should address it anyway. I went and told her that one of her kids had destroyed an expensive lipstick of mine, and that, though I know kids will be kids, I'd appreciate it if she had a word with them about not touching my things. Immediately, she was adamant that her children would never do something like that, and that it must have been our great-grandmother, who lived 3 stories down and can't climb stairs. Later I learned that she went and cried to my grandmother, G, who is also extremely entitled. She claimed that I hate her and her children, and that I like to blame them for everything. Her boys have been prone to destroying and stealing things in the past and had been caught red-handed multiple times. This annoyed the ever-living crap out of me, to say the least, so I asked my mother to talk to her and I let it slide. About a week later, her son returns and went upstairs to use the restroom again and was in there for a remarkable amount of time. I went up about 5 minutes after he'd left and I found the exact same lipstick smeared everywhere again. Some brushes were literally chopped to pieces, and a limited edition palette ripped apart and scattered everywhere. I should note at this point, I hadn't actually found the tube of the lipstick this time, and I assumed he'd taken it or thrown it away. Another week or so later, I found it shoved into a bag of pads with an expensive lipstick-covered watch. I went and I got Aunt to show her the scene, and she was once again positive that it couldn't have been her son, even though he'd locked himself in there for almost an hour. She then got upset and said that I blamed everything on her kids, etc. And she explained that it was probably great-grandmother before going and crying in her room. She literally left all 3 children alone downstairs and expected us to watch them. I went directly to my mum because I was honestly annoyed, and I asked her to deal with it before I blew up at my aunt. So she had a talk with my aunt about disciplining her sons later that night. The next day is when it starts to get fun. I went into the kitchen to find my aunt standing there looking dejected and visibly drunk. She sighed and said, "I'm sorry about your makeup, but it honestly wasn't my son." She then went on about how he hadn't left her side all day that day, which everyone knew was false, and then looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I think we have a poltergeist, and I think it's targeting my son for some reason." She went on for about 10 minutes, talking about every single thing he or his brothers had done, insisting that it had never been them all along, and had always been this ghost. I was absolutely floored, whether ghosts are real or not, whatever. But I can assure you that if we'd had a poltergeist, I would have known about it. Honestly, I wasn't looking for a fight this day. I just rolled my eyes and went back upstairs. Later, my grandmother came to see me, furious, saying that I was absolutely horrible to Aunt and that I'd made her cry. I got upset at this point and said that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me because she's too darn stupid and entitled to admit her son had destroyed some things. Aunt heard this from upstairs and called my mother to say that I was treating her horribly and that her son hadn't even done anything wrong. Unfortunately, this sequence of events only persisted for about a month and only continued to get worse. While all of this was playing out, Aunt and the kids were making everyone's lives living hell in multiple ways and completely overtook and destroyed our house, even though she was no more than a guest. The final straw in this scenario was when I found 2 lipsticks and a very sentimental necklace absolutely destroyed and torn apart after cousin had spent another hour in there. I lost my mind and went immediately to Aunt and called her out for her son's constant behaviour, and that if she didn't put a stop to it, I would lose my absolute mind with her. For about an hour or two she paced around the house exclaiming about how we were all horrible and mistreating her and blaming everything on her kids, when it couldn't possibly have been them, and how it's a ghost, and that we're all just skeptics, even though this supposed ghost has been terrorising us for years. I just had to sit through all of this because she wouldn't let me speak. Then she legitimately called an exorcist. She exclaimed to him that we were being terrorised by a poltergeist and that it's targeting her child, and that now she's probably going to get kicked out and put on the street over some gob-darn lipstick that her son didn't even destroy, and so much more. This whole situation just blew my mind, and I just sat there and listened and watched as she victimised herself and completely crap-talked me and my family to this exorcist. Eventually my mother stepped in and put a stop to the madness, and I don't know exactly what happened after that. I know that my mum went off on her at the very least over the next few days. Over the next few days, Aunt completely ignored us and wouldn't even address what happened, before one day, when she stopped me on the way out of the house and I mumbled a sort of snarky apology. In the end, my makeup never got replaced and I never really got a substantial apology, but I was less upset about the monetary value, and overall it was just about the principle of things. Aunt and the kids moved out about 2 months later because her husband had got out of prison. She moved back in later that year after leaving husband again, and then last year moved out to get back in with husband again. Since then, Aunt has pretty much destroyed her relationships with everybody, and we've all since cut contact, and she is never welcome back in our lives. I will finish this off by saying that I love my cousins dearly, and if I get so much as a hint that they're still being manipulated, I will go through hell and back to get them out of there. As far as I can tell, they're doing fine. It's stopped, but I plan to get social services involved the second I hear something goes wrong. I don't blame my cousins for anything, and at the end of the day, they're still kids with crappy parents, and honestly, they're good kids and I wish I could have been there for them more. I have a myriad of entitled parent stories revolving around my aunt, besides this one, and I hope to tell you some more soon. I feel sorry for Karen and the alternate reality that she lives in. Like, she actually believes that ghosts exist and that she's being haunted. It must be quite terrifying for her, actually.